So what makes somebody a high risk in your car insurance? I'm going to talk about, there's two versions. There's what the insurance company is looking at, the Progressive, State Farm, Allstate, all those guys. That's the insurance carrier or company. And then what your agent is also looking at as well, because there's two different things. We can shop with Nationwide, Progressive, and Safeco, and Cure Auto, and Geico, and all of those companies. There's a ton of them. And we have the ability to shop them. But there's different viewpoints that your agent is going to have than your insurance company will have. So let's dive in and go over the 5 main pieces that makes you a high-risk driver. The first one is fairly obvious. You're going to think of, okay, if I have a lot of accidents, I'm a high-risk driver. True, somewhat. If you have a lot of at-fault accidents, if you don't have a lot of at-fault accidents and they're not at-fault accidents, then the number plays a factor, not so much the cost of the claim. If you have a lot of at-fault accidents, that means you're usually driving, probably getting a few tickets, and they're gonna include that, and you're getting accidents, and yes, they're paying a lot of money, hopefully no one was hurt. So that does make a difference. When you have 2 or more, that instantly puts you in that high-risk pool. If you're afraid of that when you're talking with your agent, make sure they have accident forgiveness to your policy so that if you do have one pop up, they'll forgive it. I do that on my personal insurance because I don't know. There's a day I could have a claim. It was my fault. I wasn't paying attention. I don't necessarily look at my phone while I'm driving or watch YouTube videos down. No one does that, right? So if that's the case, yes, it could be my fault, but I don't want that to affect my insurance if I do make a mistake and cause a claim to happen. That leads into the second piece, which is violations, tickets. If you have a speeding ticket, that's fine. That's going to raise your 10, 15%. You're not going to have a huge increase, but if you have a second ticket or that first ticket was a 16 miles over the speed limit or a DUI or reckless driving, those are big. There's different levels of violations that insurance look at. It's not so much the points. They honestly don't even care about the points. It's a different story, right? There's different versions. Maybe we'll go over that at the end of the video as a bonus, but the points aren't necessarily the biggest piece. Those are more eligibility pieces, but the severity of the claim versus the severity of a ticket. If they're combined, that's actually a good thing because insurance doesn't use both against you. Because if they did that, they just lose half of their insureds. They would end up having to cancel everybody. If you have a ticket and an accident, whichever one's worse is going to be rated on your policy, at least with every company I know. Honestly, I don't even know if that's a law, but I just know that I've never seen it any other way. And I've fought in them and gotten the least worst taken off because it was the same day. We could prove it, those things. Whenever that happens, the ticket or the accident, whichever one it's going to look at as the worst, is going to play the cost factor for you. Now, the worst ones that you're going to see, like we said, reckless driving, that most of the time will get you canceled on the renewal. So next renewal, they'll usually not renew you, and then you have to go with kind of a high-risk company. There are companies out there that actually don't mind having reckless driving as long as there wasn't an accident involved, so it doesn't hit you as hard as you think it would. Same thing with lapse in insurance. That's a responsibility piece, and in insurance, responsibility is a big thing, so they use that pretty heavily. Now, there's also companies that don't feel like that should be counted against you. So there are companies that don't rate having insurance prior to having to pay more. Depends on the situation. If it was because you just missed the bill or you just said, forget it, I'm not paying insurance, and that was the case and you just kept driving, well, 5 days later, I guess I could pay the bill. No, you can't do that. That's more of the responsibility piece. But if you just haven't owned a car, almost every company gives leeway for that. It really depends on the scenario. And don't get me wrong, you can try to scam the system, but usually your registration pulls up and your previous insurance pulls up. So if they know that you had insurance 3 days ago, you saying you just bought a car won't make it better. The second or third piece that we're talking about is the license suspension. That's a big factor. You can't really buy insurance without a license. That being said, you technically can and legally can. Most companies have rules and found ways to kick you out if that's the case, right? If you're 15 or younger and you don't have a license, but you own a car, you got to be under parent. So there's different rules in different situations that can be playing a factor. But if you have a suspended license, that's usually the indication that you can't drive. And if you can't drive, you technically can't be insured. Again, that's not necessarily what insurances do. That's the upfront rule. You'll have to talk to an agent a little bit further with that if you want to learn more, because that's a little bit there's gray areas that you got to figure out the scenario specifically that will tell you the answer. We'll say this is number 3. I just went over 4 of them already. But number 3 is, like we just talked about, your history of insurance. We talked about in several videos, and actually the last video that we just posted talked about some of the discounts, and one of them was having prior insurance for a certain length of time. 3 years, 5 years. Those are the two numbers you want to remember. Let me reverse that. There's actually 4 of them. So there's 30 days, 6 months, 3 years, and 5 years. Those are the biggest factors you're going to see. So 60 days, if you've had insurance, honestly a day. If you had insurance for a day, some companies don't look at the history. They just want to know you're insured. So yes, you could join an insurance company and then try to join another one. But from what I've seen, they've almost eliminated that one. That's fallen to the wayside. Too many people tried to do it. It got them a deal and it really just doesn't exist anymore. So you're probably not going to get that one. 6 months shows proof of insurance. That's where you no longer have to say, I haven't had insurance or I had a lapse in insurance. You're on a renewal or you're 6 months in. That allows you to say, I'm insured. Doesn't matter length of time beyond that. 3 years is called the loyalty. So now you've been with the company for 3 years, which means you're not likely going to bounce around. 5 years, same thing, loyalty discount, but longer length of time. The longer you've been with an insurance company, the more that other insurance companies want your business. So they're going to give you loyalty discounts or deals for you to leave that company to join them. The fourth factor that will put you in a high-risk pool is actually not you. It could be the vehicle. So we just recently worked on a quote for somebody that wanted an Audi. Younger driver, driving an Audi. Audi is one of those cars that just doesn't matter which one it is, high performance. Same thing for Acura. Audi and Acura are two major cars that automatically go to high performance. It means there's a turbo, there's a supercharger, there's some sort of performance that gives you that speed. And the younger you are, the higher risk that is. So a young driver with a more powerful vehicle will put you in a high risk pool, at least I'd say 70% of the time. There are some times you get a Mustang or whatever the case is and they just don't care. It's just common you have that car. You get a WRX and you're young, that's gonna be high risk because it's got the turbo, all those pieces. Now, if they buy a Honda and they put a souped up engine in it, that's different. They're not going to know that because of the VIN and all of the ties to it. So there's different ways that goes, but depending on the vehicle and the age of the person, that will put you or keep you from being in some sort of a high risk. Like I mentioned, if you are trying to figure out the next steps, if you want some more advice on how do I save the most, we talked earlier about having the right coverage. The Car Insurance 101 right here is going to go over more in depth. You should watch that next. If you just want a handful of other discounts that could apply to your current policy, I've got a discount video here that will go over in that as well. I'm Mark with Think Insurance. I'll see you in the next one.